So when we put this bike engine in, it's probably going to be pretty quick. The next part to look at is the underside, but we're no longer going to need this. But underneath is looking miles better. So welcome back to KM Builds. If you're new to the channel, this is mine and Matt's 1986 Honda Acti. We're putting a Mark 1 MX-5 rear subframe, we're putting it on air suspension, and right here is where we're planning on putting a Honda Fireblade Superbike engine. In the last K-Truck video, I got around to almost fit in the rear subframe of an MX-5 into our K-Truck. So make sure you go back and check that out, because what we've done so far might make more sense. We also have plenty of videos so far on the K-Truck, so make sure you go and check some of them out too. In the last K-Truck video, we added these 5mm plates onto the end of our subframe. They're tacked on for now, but they've extended our subframe by about an inch, maybe an inch and a half. The reason for that is that this is going to be bolted directly to the chassis rails, but the chassis rails were ever so slightly wider than what the subframe was, so that's why we widened this. The truck chassis rails aren't perfectly level. As they get further back in the truck, they start to taper upwards. So that means our subframe would not sit level in the chassis. And that's where we came up with the solution of this. So this will become another piece of our chassis rail, which we will level the chassis rails in order to meet the subframe. And then these will be bolted together. So in today's video, hopefully we can completely finish getting this subframe put together and bolted onto our chassis. But towards the end of the last video, we had a big decision to make, and that was deciding if we were going to put this subframe on the center of the wheels a couple of inches further back to that of the standard axle. A couple of videos ago, I measured and took a marking of exactly where the standard axle and the center of the wheel sat in comparison to this bed. So all I can do now is just simply measure how far we want to move the wheels back into the chassis to give us more room between the rear subframe and the engine for a drive shaft, and then simply put this subframe where we want it. But first thing I'm going to do is put the truck back down and kind of figure out roughly how far we're going to move the subframe back, because we have decided to move it back. So this point on the left is the standard point where the rear axle used to sit. So we then had to decide if we were going to move this back, and if so, how much. So we did decide between 50mm or 75mm, but looking at it, we've got plenty of room at the back. It'll extend the wheelbase of the truck, and we've gone with moving the rear axle 75mm further back. Now that we've got the center of where we want the wheels, I'm going to level the truck again now. It is pretty level, but I'm just going to add a bit more adjustment to make sure it is perfect. And then I'm going to move the subframe to exactly the middle of where the marking is. And to get the middle, I'm going to do the same as what I did to take the measurement. I got a weighted string, put that on the mark and make sure that the weighted string lies exactly in the center of our hubs. And then once the subframe is exactly where we want it, I can mark here where the top of the subframe is going to be, so I can start to look at getting our pieces all tacked together.
Leveling the bed may seem pointless, but it is in fact very important. This ensures that the rear subframe is exactly where we want it in comparison to the standard axle.
So I've used the spirit level and the weighted line, and I now have the center of the axle basically exactly, as you can see I've marked on the tape there. That's the center there, and I've done the both sides. So I think that the subframe is now in the right position. So what I can do now is take some markings on where the front of the subframe is sitting on the both sides and on the back, and then I'll lift the truck back up, and then I'm going to take some measurements to make sure that both sides are within a mil or two of each other, because there is going to be a mil or two difference anyway when we come to drill the bolt holes, as we'll probably drill the holes half a mil bigger than the actual bolt that goes through, so there will be a mil or so movement if we need to. I think we're almost ready to start tacking some pieces together, so I'm going to double check my measurements now and then I'll come back to you. So I spent another hour or so just going over some of the welds on the repairs on the rear of the chassis. It's all sanded down, primered, so I've added some weld through primer. So the chassis itself now, where we want to mount the new pieces, which are these, is all ready. So the next thing I want to do, in order for me to have bent this 2mm thick steel, I had to basically angle grind a little groove all the way for at the length, which allowed me to bend it, as this was very hard to bend otherwise, but it has kind of split here and there. So what my plan is now is to basically run a weld on the inside of these two pieces just to bring them back up to their full strength, and it adds a bit of extra strength anyway. Next thing I'm going to do is weld these back up.
To weld these pieces back to their former strength, I'm just spot welding down the insides, giving enough gap between each one to keep it nice and cool and allowing it to cool before starting the next row.
So we are almost at the point where we can start tack welding these pieces into our chassis rails. I have cut out the notch because in here the brace here obviously sits a little bit lower, so what I've done is I've notched it ever so slightly just to allow a better fitment. I've also primered the inside with weld through primer, but the very last thing I think I need to do is that I'm gonna drill maybe 4 or 5 holes either side across the top. We will then weld through the holes and spot weld, as well as welding the panel around the outside. To be honest, you probably don't need it, but 4 spot welds either side is not going to do any harm, so we might as well do it. These are ready to go in. The subframe is now perfectly level, I just double checked it, and the chassis rails are also ready. I've got all my marks ready for where the subframe needs to be, so I can pretty much lower this down now and start to get everything into position ready for tack welding these in. So I'm going to spend a bit of time now getting everything into position, and then I'll show you what it looks like before we weld it. So this is probably the most stressful part of putting this subframe on, and that is making sure that I'm tacking everything together in the exact right position. So I've taken an absolute load of measurements and everything seems to be alright. So I'll show you where I've measured and how it's looking. So I'm kind of limited as to what measurements I can take, because things like this panel here, that's actually like bent. So as you can see there, it's not very straight, so you can't really use that as a point. So what I've been trying to do is use as many good points as possible to the edges. I know this cut here is pretty much perfect, so I've measured to there. So I've done multiple points from the holes there. I've measured from the bottom corners up to the point here, and the same the other side. And I've also measured the same on this side, from the holes to the chassis rails this way. I've done the short dimensions, and I've even measured from the opposite hole to the edge. I've measured from down here all the way up to the chassis rails. So I think absolutely everything is pretty much in the position it needs to be. We will have a little bit of play anyway, because with as I said earlier on, we may drill the holes to go through the chassis a mil bigger than the bolt that we're going to use to keep it all together. So we will have a mil or two to play with there. And we will have some adjustment on all of these suspension arms. We may also get some adjustable upper control arms. So there is a lot of adjustability, that if anything is a mil or two out, then we can adjust it when we have an alignment. But so far everything seems to be pretty much perfect, with the odd millimeter or so here and there. But as I said, it's very hard to take the measurements from this, as some of the panels are just not very straight at all. But let's just double check everything, and fingers crossed, let's get it all tack welded together. So I have finished tack welding, and I have used a different colour pen now and marked up, basically drawn a line where the new panel that we just welded in touches the subframe, and then I've taken a few markers then so I know where to get either side in the exact same position. But hopefully that means our new nice flat panels are now properly welded onto our chassis. So as you can see, I've used blue marker now, which will line up exactly where the markers are on there. Same on this side, I've marked the lines, and then as long as I mark them lines up exactly with these marks, then I know it goes back together properly. But as you can see now, that's all tack welded into place, ready to be finished off. As I said, now we can spot weld all of them now once we're finished, but I can now put it back into position and start looking at where we want to drill the holes in order to put the bolts on the inside of the chassis. I'm gonna have a little look at it now, put it back onto the subframe, and then try and figure out roughly where we want to put the holes, and then we can start drilling some holes and just get it bolted together. For now, I'm just going to use some smaller bolts, which I can find here, that are long enough to go through everything, but we will get some big, thick, high tensile bolts to go on this at the end for more of a permanent use. It's all back in position now, and I've had a little look underneath, and we pretty much have enough room to just drill straight through and nut and bolt. On the subframe, we will have to do an ever so slight bit of trim on the underside, but I'll have to dismantle the subframe in order to do that. I think I may just get some drill bits, drill through, and start looking at bolting this together. That on the inside of the chassis rail, where we're going to add the bolt or the nut, we're going to use something like this. So this is a 2-3mm thick piece of metal, and the plan is to essentially tack weld that into there, into place, and drill through the hole. Well, I'm probably going to tack weld this afterwards. What I'm going to do is try and get the same measurement from the end of the subframe in on both sides so that they're both equal. So all I got to do is try and by eye pretty much take some measurements and drill straight through, drill through this and drill through the subframe. So it's a little bit more difficult than I thought drilling out. I haven't drilled all 4 to size because the right size drill bit I do have is not very good. So I'm going to pick up a good new size drill bit, so I need to see what size that is. But I've managed to get 2 holes drilled, and I have bolted the rear subframe on. So I'm just going to get someone to help me lift this rear end, and I can show you what it looks like underneath. From underneath you can see it is bolted. At the minute it's not sat perfectly flat because we haven't tightened it down, as that's just sort of held in hand tight. But when we tighten the bolt this end and the bolt the other end down, we will pull that gap closer together. You can see the bolt better on the right hand side. The rear of the chassis does push out a little bit, so we don't need to trim anything this side. But if you look at the front bolt, you can see that we're actually hitting the part of the subframe, so it's not sitting flush. So that's the section in which we want to trim down. Overall, it is looking pretty good. I think I can go ahead and tack weld the plates in place. I know exactly where my holes are going to be. Everything does still seem to be measuring and be aligned, so I'm just going to go ahead, prep these 2 little areas, get these tack welded on. So that is the subframe finally bolted on. It's starting to look a bit more like a truck again now, and the next step for all of this subframe and the suspension is we've got to get the struts in and create basically some new top mounts and positions for the suspension. But that will be in a later video, so make sure you go and subscribe if you want to see that. There's a few minor things we have to do with this yet. We still have to decide what size bolts we're going to use to hold this subframe onto the chassis rails, and then I've also got to get the right size drill bit for whatever size bolt we decide to use. But a lot of progress has been made. Really happy with how it is. If there's anything you think that we've done wrong, or think that we can make this better, or any suggestions for anything coming up, make sure to go and drop a comment. We're always reading the comments, and you could always help us out where possible. But plenty to go on in the future, so we will catch you in the next one.